So we're on Daf Peites Amid Beis, 11 lines up from the bottom, at the two dots. Maser Kodem Liofos. Maser is on the bottom of the totem pole, and yet it's above Ophos. So it gets preference to Ophos, and the reason for that is because the parts of the Dam and the Murim go on the Mizbeach, and therefore they have the status of Kodshei Kodshim. So the Gemara asks, Adarabba, Ophos Kodmu, let's give preference to Ophos, Shekain Kodshei Kodshim, because at least as far as the Dam is concerned, the Dam is attached to the Mizbeach, and therefore it's Kodesh Kadoshim. Afilu hachi, the Gemara says, min zevach adif. If we have to choose between a zevach, which is an animal that's slaughtered with shchita, and a bird which gets malika and not shchita, shchita is that much more sophisticated and profound and complex than malika, and therefore zevach gets precedence over birds, over ophos. Omar Avina bar Shilo. A murei kodshim kalim sheyotzu lifnei zrikas adam psulim. Ravina is addressing the following question: what's the status of kodshim kodshe kalim as far as the emurim is concerned? We said the emurim are burnt on the mizbeach, and therefore, although the carbon itself is kodshim kalim, but nevertheless the emurim have the status, the upgraded status of kodshe kodshim. Now, there's a halacha of a psul yotze. When Kodesh Kadoshim is taken out of the Azora, it automatically becomes disqualified. And now the Gemara wants to know, does that apply only after Zrikas Hadam? Because you can't burn the Imurim until after the Zrika. The Zrika clinches all the Avodah, and that's matir, the last stage, which is the burning of the Imurim on the Mizbeach. But before Zrika, there's no burning of the Emurim on the Mizbeach, and therefore, presumably, the Emurim did not have the status of Kodshei Kodshim. Comes along Ravina, and he says, no. Since the Emurim are designated to ultimately be burnt on the Mizbeach, even though at this stage there was not a Zrikas Adam, but we anticipate that these emurim will be burnt on the Mizbeach. And already now it has a quasi-status of Kodshei Kodshim, meaning Kodshei Kodshim are ready for the Mizbeach. These emurim are not yet ready for the Mizbeach. So therefore, in that sense, the emurim of Kodshei Kodshim, of Kodshim Kalim, could not be considered Kodshei Kodshim. For example, the law of Me'ilah, which applies to Kodshei Kodshim, will not apply to the Emurim before Zrikas Adam. However, there's another flip side of Kodshei Kodshim, and that is the Psul of Yotze. So even though vis-a-vis the issue of Kodshei Kodshim, as far as Me'ilah is concerned, Ravina Bar Shilat will certainly agree, he'll concede that there is no Kodshei Kodshim, and there is no Me'ilah before Zrikas Adam. But on the other hand, his Chiddush, which is pretty radical, is that there is a status of Kodshei Kodshim as far as the negative element of the Psul of Yotze. V'tana Tuna, and the Gemara now quotes a Tana to support Ravina, Mipnei shehu zevach v'yeshno Kodshei Kodshim domav v'imurim. We just finished saying in the Mishnah that the reason why you give preference to a zevach before an oaf is because the zevach has Kodshei Kodshim, meaning the emurim are burnt on the Mizbeach. And from the fact that the Mishnah combines the two together, number one, Damav, and number two, Emurim, we should assume an equation, an analogy between the two. So the Gemara analyzes this. Wait a second. Bishlem Emurim less mehu bi'ophos. I understand that there's no Emurim in Ophos, but at least you have Dam. mean, the burnt, let's say an oaf, a chatas oaf has dam, and you do the mitzvah dam on the mizbeach. So there is at least one element of kodshe kodshim, even for ophos. El adam mia isa. I have to admit to you and concede that as far as dam is concerned, because of the din of mitzvah adam and achat sof, there is kodesh kadoshim. So therefore, you can ask me then, what's unique about the case of kochim kalam like maser and lav kamashpalon a murim ki domu. The Mishnah is telling me that the reason why you give preference to the maser over the bird, over the oaf, is because of this equation between a murim and dam. And what do we see from this equation? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, the volume is turned off. Okay, sorry. Let me. So the Gemara analyzes and says, El lav komashbo and emurim ki damu, that the Mishnah combines, in the case of Maser, of Kodshim Kalim, both emurim and dam. And what does this equation teach me? Ma domo lifnei zrika af emurim kodem zrika. Even before the zrika, when it's impossible at this point in time to take the emurim and burn them on the mizbech, nevertheless, it is still considered an upgrade of Maser and Kochim Kalim vis-a-vis Ophos. Why? Kakarele Kochi Kochim. Because we can consider it Kochi Kochim. Because Ma Domu Mifsal Biyotze Afe Murim Mifsal Biyotze. If the Mishnah is combining Dam and a Murim, that equation, that analogy is teaching me that just like in the case of Dam, if the Dam is taken out of the Azara, and that's before the Zrika, because once the Zrika is done, then the carbon is kosher. Obviously, this Yotze, the Psul Yotze, is before it was subject to Zrika al Gabi Mizbeach. So too in the case of Emurim, even before the Emurim are subject to Zrika, and technically you cannot burn them on the Mizbeach, nevertheless, they already have the status of Koche Koche. And that puts the Kodesh of Kodshim Kalib, in this case Maser, above the Kodesh of the bird, of the Chatas Oaf, because in Chatas Oaf, there's no such thing as a Psul Yotze on a Murim, because there are no Emurim at all. It's just Dam. Name it Misayele. The Gemara wants to bring a Machlokes, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, from which they want to derive the conclusion to support Ravina. What is the issue between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? So it's Besar Kochim Kalam Sheyotzu Lifnei Zrikas Adam, exactly the issue of Ravina. Rabbi Yochanan are kosher. Rabbi Yochanan says you can't call the Emurim Kodesh Kadoshim, so that it should be subject to a psul of Yotze, because you haven't yet done the Zrikas Adam, and therefore you can't bring these Emurim on the Mizbeah. For Reish Lakish Omer Apostle. And the Gemara explains. Rabbi Yochanan Omer kosher holvis sofo lotzes. Since we're talking about Kodshim Kalim can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. And it doesn't limit the Kodshim to the Azara. So therefore, after the Zrikas Adam is concerned, you're allowed to take these Emurim outside of the Azara and eat them anywhere in Yerushalayim. And therefore, since it can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim, therefore, it doesn't have the status of Kochi Kochim. But Reish Lakish Amar Apostle, Adayin lo higia zmanu lotzes. Since he hasn't yet done the Zrika, there's no way that at this point you can take the Emurim out of the Azara. That would passel the Emurim, and therefore they become passel with Yotze. But Ad kan lo pli yel b'basar. The machlokas is with regard to the basar of a zevach, because the basar of a zevach, in the case of Kodshim Kalim, can be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. So Rabbi Yochanan therefore sees that since it's so full lotzes, there's no psul of Yotze. Avol Murim, with regard to those parts of the limbs of the animal, of the zevach, that have to be brought on the mizbeach, lo, right? There's no machlokas, meaning even Rabbi Yochanan would agree and concede to Reish Lakish that since the emurim are designated to go on the mizbeach, that even before zrika they have the status of kodesh kodshim, and therefore even Rabbi Yochanan agrees to Ravina Bar Shila. No, the Gemara says, Hu adin debei murim nari pligi. Rabbi Yochanan argues even in the case of a murim, and he holds that the status of the murim before zrika is that of kodshim kalim, and therefore if it left the environs and the restricted area of the azara, it would not be possible midin yotze. You'll ask me, so why do they argue only about basar? They should have told me a bigger chiddush that they argue even about the emurim. And the answer is kol chod Reish Lakish. The Gemara wants to tell you how far Reish Lakish is willing to go, l'chumra, to impose a psul on of yotze on the emurim. And therefore, the Gemara says that psul of Yotze will apply, according to Reish Lakish, even in a case of basar. Even though basar is so latzes, the basar after the zrika will not be limited to achila b'toch hazara, but rather you eat it outside the hazara, anywhere in Yerushalayim. It's kodshim kalim. Now, filu basar, the so latzes, al dai lo yigis ma latzes, because Reish Lakish says right now you can't take it out of Yerushalayim and eat it outside of Yerushalayim before the zrika. Perhaps this issue that divides Ravina and those who argue and reject Ravina, or divides Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, is a matter of machlokas tanoim. And we have a brisa that records that a murei kodshim kalim sheyotzu lifnei zrika sadam, which is exactly our case, and before zrika, these emurim are not yet designated for the mizbeach. And therefore, you would say that they're not subject to the psul of Yotze. However, as far as Me'ilah is concerned, Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein molin b'hem. There is no Me'ilah. And why is there no Me'ilah? Because it's kodshim kalim. It's not kodshe kodshim. Kodshe kodshim are subject to Me'ilah, but not kodshim kalim.